Chapter 1. Somewhere TX. The scent of a strange wolf lingered over everyday Joe's bar like invisible fog. Allan VonBrandt held up one hand and halted the two deputies who had come along as backup. "I'll handle this one alone, boys." He pulled his cowboy hat down to the edge of his brow. His damn brother had promised him there wouldn't be any trouble. But with 4 families of wolves in town for the weekend, he should have known. He pushed through the narrow door. The dance floor was empty and the bar was dead, except for a crowd of drunk cowboys tossing punches over near the mechanical bull. The lights had been turned down for the night crowd and the neon signs were the only significant illumination. He nodded at the staff huddled around the bar. "Y'all stay out of sight now. I'll handle this mess." He crunched over broken glass and hooked one thumb around his holster. 5 big cowboys in flannel shirts and Wranglers traded punches under one of the flashing beer signs. Allan whistled and the cowboys looked up, drunk, questions on their lips. "What the damn hell is going on here?" Allan asked, but punches kept landing. From some other dark corner, he turned in a quick circle looking for the source of the noise. Suddenly, a Wrangler body flew over the mechanical bull and crashed into one of the dimly lit cowboys, knocking him to the ground. "Stop!" Allan moved around the bull, into the half-dark just as the legs of a chair whipped into the air and another Wrangler-clad ass went sailing out the other side of the mechanical bull. Allan took a deep breath and growled, "I said stop." Out of the shadowed corner, the figure froze, but the chair continued to move. It sailed out of her hands, out of sight, and off to his left. He heard the unmistakable crack of something giant and glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. How had he known it was a woman? Scent. She's the wolf. Maybe he'd known since he first smelled her, but he had also seen curves and the briefest flash of hair, moving in a way only a woman's could. The inhale of her breath broke their silence. "Shit!" She dropped her hands. All of the cowboys clamored at once. Various rounds of "I didn't do it" and "It was her." Allan couldn't take his eyes off the wolf. His heartbeat crept up, faster and faster until he felt his breath coming quicker. "Everyone shut up." He backed out of the circle, keeping his eye on the wolf. "Or you're all going to jail." She matched his slow steps, coming toward him and into the light. Her dark hair swayed behind her side to side, almost past her waist. Her white-blue frostbite eyes pinned him and her nostrils flared. The strong spice of magic snaked through the air and caught him by the throat. He swallowed against his response, against the coursing blood and the heated breath, against the loss of control. Allan broke the stare down and snarled at the cowboys. "Someone tell me what the hell happened here. Right now." Cowboy 1 pointed at the wolf. "She started it. She broke a bottle on me." Cowboy 2 swiped at the glass Allan had walked through, then flashed a bloody gash on the side of his hand. "All he did was ask her to dance," said Cowboy 3, nodding at the jukebox. "SKYNRD was on. It's our thing." On top of the jukebox, the discarded chair rested in a pile of glass shards. Something had been hanging up there, and the chair had obviously shattered it and brought it crashing down. Allan couldn't remember what had been there. Life didn't take him to Joe's very often. He'd have to ask the proprietor what had been damaged in the fray. And at the center of that fray was this raven-haired beauty with the icy gaze, crossing her arms under her breasts and holding his eyes in a fearless dare. "So it took 7 of you to teach her a lesson?" Allan raised an eyebrow. "We're not with them." Cowboy 4 pointed to 5, 6, and 7. "When I heard the bottle break, I stepped in and they jumped us. It sort of escalated from there," 5 said. Allan pursed his lips and glanced at the wolf. She still hadn't spoken in her own defense, but the magic pull grew stronger by the second. From a far corner in the booths, someone spoke up to validate Cowboy 4's story. Allan depressed the button on his walkie. "Backup, come on in." Within a few short moments, his 2 deputies were crunching through the glass. He pointed to the first group. "You take those 3, Bryce. And Young, you've got these 4. He zeroed in on the wolf. "You come with me." "What should we do, boss?" Eli Bryce's voice caught Allan as he retreated to the stage where the light was lower. The wolf followed, her steps slow and sultry. She was going to make this about the magic, he could tell. She was one of those Louisiana wolves. No boundaries, no propriety. Get their statements. Allan turned his back on his deputies and tried to Ignore the thrumming pulse of her scent, the closer she came to him. When they were a good 10 feet from the humans, he rounded on her. What in the hell are you doing out here on your own? She turned her tongue inside her mouth and a smile crept across her round, full lips, blowing off some steam. Aaron promised me. He promised that no one would come into town. She shrugged and her breasts bounced inside her sleeveless top. She wasn't even wearing a fucking bra. These assholes had zeroed in on her because she looked like sex on a lollipop stick ready to lick. Tight jeans accentuated the curve of her ass and the black corset. Why thing appeared to be one whisper from slipping down over the rounded tops of her breasts. No wonder they tried to fight with her. They were hoping she would flash them, and were willing to take a punch for it. Holy hell, Allan. Get a grip. He shook his head. I should arrest you. She put her hands together in front of her, pushing her cleavage up over the edge of her top. Cuff me, officer. Don't play games with me. I'm not my brother. I don't give wolves special treatment. Her eyes dropped to his fisted hands. And yet, you came in here by yourself. And left your deputies outside. You isolated me near the rear exit, I might add, and I can see in your eyes that you feel the magic. You want me as much as I want you. I do not. Allan cleared his throat. What I want is for you to go the hell back out to the ranch and stay there. He turned back to his deputies who had their notebooks out and were scribbling statements while the cowboys shot angry looks in her direction. You want me? You want to fuck me? The word slipped from her like a wet strand of hair sliding off a naked shoulder, and then he could see her naked shoulder, her dark hair, her wet skin. She was right. He needed sex, but not with her. He'd been waiting too long. Celibate too long. This girl smelled like arousal and he was getting caught up in her seduction. If he didn't do something, he was going to end up with a full-on erection in front of his deputies. The thought of sex was already starting to pump his blood. Take their statements and let them go, Allan called to his deputies. What about the damage to the bar? Eli's pen froze in midair and his open-mouthed question was echoed in the faces of all the cowboys. I'll take care of it. He grabbed her by the arm. She's family. I'll see that she gets out to the ranch. You two go back to the station and file a report. Are we gonna arrest anybody? Jeff yelled after him, but Allan had already hustled the she-wolf out the back door. No, was all he said. Once he had her out into the crisp November evening, he released her arm and pointed to the parking lot in his big white trailblazer that said sheriff on the side in blocky green letters. He still hadn't gotten used to driving the thing. It had only been a week. But instead of following his direction, she pushed on his chest, knocking him back against the brick facade of Joe's bar. She pressed her body against his and slid her hands up his sides. Allan dodged away from the kiss she tried to plant on him and she grabbed his shirt, wrestling him back against the building. Her smile was secret sexy. Stop. He grabbed her arms and walked her backwards toward his vehicle. You are coming with me. With hooded eyes, she glanced down at the front of his pants. You bet I am. Chapter 3. Allan stood in the back of the massive dining room, as far from the horny Louisiana enforcer as he could get. He held his cowboy hat in front of his crotch and cursed Aaron for ordering him to stay. The girl Raina wouldn't take her eyes off him, and he would rather have been anywhere else. Root canals. Major surgery. Hell, he would have taken a torture chamber over this. He didn't give a shit what his dick thought. Raina was trouble. Aaron was blathering on as always. He cared way too much about magic bullshit, and not enough about the fact that Raina needed some discipline. She'd put them all in danger, and not just the wolves in the VonBrandt family, but all the people in somewhere. The last thing they needed was a bunch of drunk cowboys wondering why she could throw grown men across a bar or how she could fight 3 men at once. People started asking questions when things didn't make sense, and eventually, there would be a nutjob who asked the wrong questions and they'd have to do the spell, the one they'd never had to do, the one that made humans forget and disappear. In a small town like somewhere Texas, Allan was all that stood between the humans and the wolves. Maybe we should ask Elise instead of talking over her head. Raina's alpha spoke up. She's here, isn't she? Aaron signaled to their cousin Jared, who stood next to Allan and twitched almost as nervously. Jared doesn't want her in the room for now. He knows the whole story. The whole story? Asked the Oklahoma family's alpha, a wide-faced, stocky Man with a big scar on one cheek. Aaron frowned. There is no whole story. That's why we're here, Harry. While everyone had their attention focused on Jared, Allan noticed Raina. Standing behind her Alpha, nostrils flaring. She wasn't paying attention to the pack business at all. When they made eye contact, the whites of her eyes flashed and her mouth fell open just enough for Allan to see her tongue snake out and lick around her lips. He remembered what those lips had felt like, latched onto his skin. Too hot, too wet, too ready. She was the epitome of everything he was trying to avoid. About female wolves, it was all about sex and mating and wolves and running. But that wasn't his life. He'd known since he was a boy that he wanted to be part of the human world. Now that he was the sheriff, he'd put his flag in the sand and he intended to be the whole package. He used his magic to keep humans safe from each other, or to punish the ones who couldn't get their shit together. But that meant he had to be fully a part of the human world. Not like his family who stayed secluded and hidden. He would absolutely not be taking a wolf mate. He had it all planned out. Jared was still talking with the Oklahoma Alpha, explaining something about a church and a baby left on the steps. Aaron had called all the families together to talk about the wolf Jared had found in New Orleans. Elise, the one without a pack. This was exactly the kind of thing Allan hated about wolves. Being part of the human world was almost an arrestable offense. What I don't understand is, how did she manage to change every month inside the city of New Orleans without y'all knowing anything about her? The El Paso Alpha pounded on the big mahogany dining table. Damn it, Francis, y'all fell down on the job. That got Raina's attention. For the first time since Allan had walked into the room, her gaze shifted elsewhere. Her teeth flashed and she took a step from Francis's side toward the group of black-clad El Paso wolves, but Francis had a hand on her arm. At least someone could keep her in check. We don't patrol the city. Francis yanked Raina back to his side and she shook him off. No one has ever heard of an unbonded wolf before, so it wasn't like we were on the lookout. El Paso crossed his arms. We woulda known. Aaron stood. We're not here to point fingers, gentlemen. We need to get to the bottom of this. Find out how it could have happened. Raina's chest was heaving, bringing her cleavage into view with each in-breath for God and everyone. The woman needed a shawl or something. Cover that up. She shouldn't be on display for anyone to ogle. She clapped her eyes on his and seemed to calm and focus. Before long she was almost panting, moving her tongue around inside her mouth in ways that made him think of all the things she could do with it. Allan! Aaron's voice snapped him out of that fantasy. He glanced at his brother. What? Did you run her prints and DNA? Whose? Aaron narrowed his eyes. They had talked about this. Right. He'd forgotten. Aaron had asked him to run a sheet on Elise back before the election when he hadn't had time. I haven't yet, but I can do that tonight. I have to go back to the station to report the incident at Joe's. I can do it then. It helps to have a wolf in cop's clothing. The El Paso Alpha lifted his gut and shared a laugh with his pack. I'd like to see that up where we're at. Allan's shoulders snapped to attention. I'm not a wolf in cop's clothing. I'm the fucking sheriff and I have a job to do. He pulled his hat back on and settled it down so it covered his eyes. Wait. Aaron's voice was almost a growl. I need you to stay until we decide what to do. We might need you. You don't need me. He swiped at the edge of his hat, trying not to show his anger in front of the other wolves. This is pack business. I have a job to do. In town. Let me go do it. You'll figure out your magic and let me know what happens. Allan. Aaron's growl edged the little hairs on Allan's neck up. I asked you to stay. With a long breath, he met his brother's eyes. Do you want me to run her sheet or not? Aaron pressed his knuckles into the table and leaned forward. He exchanged a glance with Andrea, his enforcer. The two looked at Jared. In the silence, while all the VonBrandts appeared to be having a wordless conversation with their eyes, Raina's voice rang out. We ran her sheet back in New Orleans. These were just emailed to me this morning. She reached for a couple of folders that sat in front of Francis and tossed them into the middle of the table. Nothing. Not even a credit card or a parking ticket. It won't help. If Allan hadn't been so pissed at her, he might have given her a thankful glance, but he wasn't going to give in to the urge to meet her eyes. No. He Absolutely wasn't. We need a new approach, gentlemen. The girl isn't hiding her history, she is seeking it. Francis Dubois spoke up. He had the kind of voice that would silence a whole room. He was the oldest wolf at the table and had the most experience as pack alpha. All the wolves looked at him. Except fucking Raina. Allan could still feel her eyes on him, could feel the pull of her magic on his. His phone buzzed and he slid it carefully out of his pocket while the wolves discussed how to look into Elise's mysterious past. Maybe it would be Laurel. Break the wolf monotony of his night. I just got to the bar. What the fuck happened to my lamp? Allan rolled his eyes. Joe Walker. He wanted to say it's just a fucking lamp. But he tried to play the politician like human sheriffs had to do. He texted back. The woman who broke it will pay whatever restitution you ask. He held the phone. He told his deputies not to make any arrests, assuming it would all blow over and he could get the she-wolf out of the public eye. But if Joe insisted on making a big deal out of this, it could put him in a bind. Allan allowed himself a short glance at Raina. She swayed her shoulders under his gaze and thrust her chest out. The movement seemed dangerous more than a challenge. She was going to be the fucking death of him. Another text buzzed in his hand. That was an authentic Tiffany antique lamp. It's worth fucking $20,000, Allan. Want to see this woman in jail. Fucking fuck. Damn Joe Walker and his expensive shit lamps. Damn Raina Dubois. And her devil-may-care. Damn his fucking job and his fucking pack. This was going to be a long night. Chapter 4. A wolf trying to avoid anything to do with wolves. Denial much? Or was there something she was missing? Raina moved back from the main table where her father and the other alphas still sat discussing the best option for locating a lead on where the hell Elise had come from. Wolves didn't typically drop from the sky, so Elise had a past. The trick would be picking up the scent. Right now the only scent that interested her sat directly across the room. Brooding and annoyed, the wolf in sheriff's clothing wanted to leave. Apparently, he did respect his alpha enough not to storm out without permission. When they stopped the meeting for a dinner break, she easily found her way through the crowded room, and next to the object of her desire. He smelled good enough to lick from head to foot. Why don't you want to help the pack? She asked, following him down a hallway and into beautiful kitchen. A growl rumbled in his chest. I am helping the pack. You're not. You broke it. $20,000 lamp, and the bar owner wants you put in jail. How am I supposed to help the pack if one of the alpha's daughters can't keep a lid on her temper in town? I can't arrest you. The full moon is in 2 nights. Raina frowned. Expensive lamp. She never would have thought some Cowtown bar would decorate with anything not found at a generic bulk warehouse. Didn't matter. Her father would pay to replace it and more for the inconvenience. I'll make sure to keep a lower profile from here on out. She crossed her fingers behind her back and gave Allan a reassuring smile. She didn't plan to get into more trouble, but nothing she did was ever low profile. He needed to get used to that. She had no intention of changing, but she had no intention of giving up on him being her mate either. Sure you will, he snapped, yanking open the fridge and taking a shiner from the shelf inside. He closed the door without offering her one. I don't try to get in trouble, but I won't let you or anyone else make me feel bad for teaching those flannel-wearing handsy cowboys to ask before feeling up a girl. I wasn't the only one in the bar they were bothering, just so you know. The 2 girls playing pool next to the cowboys hadn't been able to convince them of their disinterest either. When she'd gone over to watch the girls' game, the so-called flirting had commenced. Hell, between all the touching and groping and lewd comments, she'd been tempted to put a lot more pain on those boys. They certainly deserved it. There are laws. Plus, you threw a grown man halfway across a room. Do you realize how lucky you are that no one questioned how you did that? Raina opened her mouth and then snapped it back shut. He did have a point. There. She'd made a bad choice. At home she was used to being surrounded by wolves. The New Orleans pack was massive compared to the VonBrandt family. There were whole businesses, bars, and restaurants that catered only to werewolves, places where they didn't have to fear being seen. Plus New Orleans had so much weird shit and voodoo stuff 24/7, the locals didn't think twice about seeing anything out of the ordinary. Just stay on the ranch and out of town. You need to loosen up a little. She sidled a little closer and took the beer from his hand, taking a long sip before handing it back to him. He stared at her, a mixture of lust and irritation swirling in his big brown eyes, as if he couldn't decide whether to yell at her or kiss her. She made the choice for him. Grabbing the lapels of his shirt, she attacked his mouth without hesitation. Her body burned with need. He was her mate. She was more sure of it than anything else in her life. He just didn't agree with her correction. He was trying to pretend it wasn't true. Denial again. This man had some issues to work through. First and foremost, he needed to embrace being a wolf. Allan returned the kiss for a millisecond before pushing her away, but that small taste hadn't been enough. No way in hell was she giving up now. She tightened her grip on his shirt and wrapped a leg around his thigh, rubbing her hip directly across a very hard bulge in his pants. Now we're talking. No, we can't do this. Fuck. She pouted as he untangled her body from his and pushed her away. Can't. Smant. By the end of the day, she'd have those delicious lips of his on her again, and next time there would be no pushing away. Look, she said. I'll talk to the bar owner. I'm sure he'll be fine if we make it right. We can replace the light. How are you going to explain that you threw a man over the mechanical bull with your spaghetti arms? I wasn't going to go into detail. I was just going to apologize and give him check. Money talks, cowboy. She crossed her arms beneath her breasts, forcing them just a little higher in the corseted top she was wearing. Boobs. Do too, and they've yet to fail me. His nostrils flared slightly and she smiled. He might be in denial about her being his mate, but he could only hold out for so long. What a wolf wanted, wolf always got in the end. I don't want you anywhere near Joe. If he forces my hand, I'll have to arrest you. He's pissed. He put the half-empty beer bottle on the counter behind her and huffed away. Just leave it be. I'll take care of it. Raina grabbed the shiner and downed what was left in a few swallows. Something a little harder would have been nice, but it would do for now. The back door slammed shut behind Allan. She needed to move fast. A quick power walk down the hallway toward the large study where everyone had been meeting before produced nothing. Chatter up ahead from another room drew her further down the hall. Her father was standing aside with the alpha from Oklahoma. She waited to interrupt until there was a natural break in the conversation. Dad. Her father nodded and the other alpha smiled at her before walking away. What is it, Raina? I need to give Allan a check for some damages. Apparently the bar owner where I broke an antique lamp is really pissed and wants me arrested. Raina, you shouldn't have been in town to begin with. We're here for the summit meeting and the full moon run. That's it. Allan was right to be angry with you. This is a small town. Their small town. The VonBrandts are very careful here. We are their guests. You are protected back in New Orleans. Raina, there we exist outside of most human circles. This town is very different. Her father pulled his billfold from his back pocket and handed it to her. Whatever the cost of the damage, double the amount. She nodded. I'm sorry. Guilt from her father's disappointment quickened her pulse. She hated disappointing him. He carried the weight of their family sorrow the hardest. He blamed himself, and even though she did as she pleased, and he let her, she never wanted to lay more weight on his shoulders. He cupped her face and smiled. I know, my darling. I also know that you will continue to follow your heart and Allan into town again, but this isn't New Orleans, so just be mindful of your surroundings. I will. A smile tugged the corners of her mouth. Of course he knew she was interested in Allan. It wasn't like she'd been trying to hide it. She never tried to hide anything from anyone. Allan. Raina jogged down the sidewalk toward the SUV marked somewhere TX. Sheriff. He was already backing up and turning around to leave. She waved the check in the air and he rolled down his window. She sprinted up and handed over the check. This should cover and make up for the inconvenience. Please apologize for me. I did not mean to cause you a problem in town. His face softened just a little with her apology. He took the check from her, and his eyes widened. This is too much. No. This is damages plus inconvenience. I might have made a mistake. Might have. Allan scoffed. A growl started in her throat, but she bit it back. I acted irrationally in a bar full of humans. It won't be an issue again. Raina chose her words carefully. She fully intended to act irrationally again. It just wouldn't be In a bar next time. I'll make it right with Joe. It'll be fine. Just stay away from his place. Okay. I can do that. She had no desire to visit the honky-tonk bar again anyway. She had other plans. Chapter 6. It was well past midnight, but the VonBrandt mansion was still very much awake. Raina breezed through the unlocked front door and down the main hallway, passing several wolves from out of town. She recognized the enforcer from Oklahoma and nodded to her as she walked by. Seen any VonBrandts? Raina asked. The study. The big meeting has broken for the night, but the groups have formed throughout the house. The moon tomorrow night has everyone antsy. Several went for run tonight. A run. That would be nice, but she really needed to grill someone about Allan's reasoning for denying a mate. It wasn't wolf-like. No wolf on earth would run from a fated match, but that's exactly what the big sheriff was doing. Thanks, she said, and pushed open the large door barring the entrance to the VonBrandt study. Allan's scent was strong in the room and she breathed deeply, taking in as much as she could. This was the last place she'd expected him to turn up after their encounter at his office, but there he was standing at the back of the room staring out the window, all tall and handsome in hers. Eventually, he was a lock and she just needed to keep trying keys until she landed on the right one. For the moment, she wanted to relieve some pent-up frustration. What the fuck is wrong with you, Allan? Raina surged into the room, her quick strides eating up the distance between them. He turned just as she was about to grab his arm. The eyes were the same. The hair was the same. Even a similar face stared down at her, but it wasn't Allan. Air whooshed from her lungs and she halted her approach, stopping cold. Allan's scent was on the man. Recently too. You must be Raina. Her eyebrows raised and she narrowed her gaze. Adam? She asked, searching her memory for relevant information about the VonBrandt Alpha's youngest brother. The man in front of her was dressed like a farmhand. Flannel shirt, tight wranglers and ropers, and besides smelling like he'd recently met with Allan, the man was covered head to foot in horse dander and hay dust. That's me. What can I help you with? Raina crossed her arms. Maybe you can tell me why your brother won't have sex with me. Adam coughed and put his glass of scotch down on the windowsill. Not that I'm a nympho, but sex between mates is about the bond. I'm his mate. And he's being a jackass. You're sure? Raina nodded. Positive. No doubt. Allan is stubborn. Even as a kid, if something bothered him, he would disappear to think about it. I remember this one time he spent the night up at the high school football field because he and Dad were arguing. So he's hiding from me? Why doesn't he want a mate? I've never met a wolf. That was so against it. It's not like fate comes knocking on our doors every other week. Allan likes his life the way it is. Just give him time to adjust to the idea. He's really hooked on his human life and friends. He's a wolf, not a human. He may have a human job, but he's still a wolf. Adam nodded, picked up his glass and took another sip. And that right there is the problem. He's technically a wolf, but his entire life revolves around humans. Sure, he cares about us and follows pack orders when necessary, but his life is this town. So you're telling me he doesn't want me because I'm a wolf? Probably. Fucking hell. He was more messed up than she'd thought. So he's hiding. Trying to convince himself that he doesn't want me as a mate. Adam opened his mouth to speak and then snapped it shut again. What? Raina asked. Spit it out. It's not like you made a great first impression. What with the bar fight and him having to cover for you with his office? I'm sure that's part of it too. Just give him some space. With Allan, that's always best. Yeah, Raina sighed. That's not my style. Allan threw his truck into park in front of his house and swiped open his phone. Laurel's text had come through while he was driving back from the office, and he wasn't about to look at his phone until his vehicle had come to a complete stop. 9 a.m. at the all-nighter works for me. See you there. He turned off the engine and stuck the phone in his pocket. He wasn't much of a texter, but that had been Laurel's preference. He could be flexible. The air outside was almost what you might call cold. Not quite the bite that it would get by December, but not warm anymore. He preferred the cold, rainy winter anyhow. Keep everyone indoors. Hell, it would be great if it would snow. Cut down on crime for a day or two. At least. But that likely wasn't in the cards for somewhere. He couldn't remember the last time it had really snowed. Still, there was something in the air that he couldn't place. It wasn't cold, or the promise of rain. He walked up the sidewalk toward his front door and paused on the stoop. Allan scanned the street. Dark. Deserted. Then what the hell had his hackles up? He put his hand on the door, but the nagging feeling wouldn't let him relax. Raina. Of course it was Raina. She was probably laying in wait somewhere inside. No doubt his chat with Adam had produced the opposite results. His fucking brothers. Meddlers all. Allan could just guess what had happened. Either Adam had gone to Aaron or had found Raina himself. They were all fucking up in arms about fate. His brother's sympathetic ear had been a ruse. His house of all fucking places. A man's home should be his fortress. Like fucking Superman. He shouldn't be able to smell a roused she-wolf all over his door. His door should be his. It should be safe. And it was open. What the hell? Had Adam made her a key or something? Shit. Allan stepped backwards, his own momentum propelling him off the steps and into the wet grass. He shifted his weight back and forth, swearing to himself. The last thing he needed was Raina rubbing her scent all over his bed, or his couch, or his fucking letter openers, or whatever she was touching. Fuck. The woman didn't listen. His brothers didn't listen. No one understood. He stomped back to his truck and opened the door, glancing back at the house. Damn it. All he wanted was to be able to come home at night and have a woman there to share his life with. That had been the whole reason for calling Laurel in the first place. But not a wolf. He did not need one more reason to be tied to his secretive family and their pack life. If he married a human, he would finally be fulfilling the purpose of the moonbound curse, and the wolfy meddling of the VonBrandt brothers would be limited to orders from the alpha only. Besides, Raina was too much a wolf. Her sexuality, her wanting to be naked, her wanting him to fuck her in public. That was how wolves were. All about the sex and the shifting. He didn't want that. Although someone should have told that to his dick. Just smelling her had made his heart speed and his blood race and thicken and harden. Damn. He couldn't deny they had magic between them. Whichever fate had decided there was a wolf out there he should be with, it had definitely chosen. He just wasn't in the habit of listening to fate. He made his own fate. The bright swath of his headlights flooded the front of his modest little house, and a smile curled across his lips. This was home now. He liked being home. Not tonight, of course, but he could be home again soon. Once the summit was done and all the wolves retreated to their territories, and life could go back to being normal again, then he could go home. For the time being, he'd have to be content with hunkering down somewhere. Raina was going to be this persistent, showing up at his house and picking his locks. Then she wasn't to be trifled with. She wasn't the slutty Oklahoma wolf who had thrown herself at him a few years ago when he'd been transporting a fugitive. That girl had given up on the first rebuff. Raina was committed, he had to give her that. She was also damn hot, but he would eventually forget about how good she'd look naked. His dick would forget as soon as she was back in New Orleans. Life would settle down and normalize. Coffee with Laurel the next morning would open up a whole new world for him, and after the moon, Raina would be gone and Allan would get some fucking sleep. The ride out to Adam's ranch gave him a chance to ice his erection into compliance, and by the time he pulled up behind his brother's barn, he was flaccid and calm, just the way he preferred. Controlled, peaceful. He grabbed a wool blanket out of his travel kit and looked around for somewhere to bunk down. The hay would be itchy and would get stuck in his clothes, but it would be preferable to getting a crick in his neck in the cab of the truck. He'd parked far enough behind the barn so that he was out of sight from the road. There wasn't room in the barn to park the whole thing, but he just needed to keep Adam from coming out thinking there was an intruder. If it hadn't been almost 2 a.m, he would have knocked and slept in the house. He rolled out the blanket and laid down between the big tires of Adam's tractor. That way, if he got cold, he could always jump up the stairs and sleep in the cab. The barn was dark, and the horses moved uneasily around him, this interloper in their space. He knew what they felt like and cooed at them, poor beasts. He was unexpected, and that would unnerve them. Allan stretched his arms behind his head and gazed up at the ceiling, talking out loud to the horses and trying to calm them. It's just Allan, you know me. Best Kip, Arrow. You've smelled me before. Won't hurt you. He settled his shoulders down into the blanket and the hay. Underneath. I get it, I promise. Having something loose in your barn while y'all are trapped in here, ripe for the picking. Trust me, I feel you. But I promise my intentions are honorable. He cracked his neck first one way then the other and tried to relax. I promise all I want is a good night's sleep. But that wasn't all he wanted. The dark and the wild, it got to him. This was the danger of Adam's ranch or Aaron's. The wildness out here got under his skin and then he felt like scratching the itch. Hopefully Raina would go home right away. He needed his four walls back. And his cold. Chapter 9. The VonBrandt mansion loomed on the horizon for miles, even though Allan couldn't see it. Aaron's summons, even via text, had been laced with what? Fuck. No one liked to make Aaron mad. He had paperwork to drop off but he needed to get back home and get cleaning before it was time to run. The day only had so many hours in it and sunset seemed to come faster on days when he knew he'd be a wolf all night. Aaron's dining room was empty, and so was the kitchen. For a family hosting a bunch of werewolves for a moon run, they seemed to be pretty reclusive. The chairs were all pulled out, away from the big table like people had left in a hurry. Allan set the envelope down and scratched on it with his pen. For Aaron. He was nearly to the front door when his brother's voice rang out behind him. Trying to get away without seeing me? Yup. Aaron's pissed. Allan grabbed the back of his neck and rubbed at it. Just have things to do before tonight. Sit down. His brother put on his alpha voice and pointed to the dining room. We need to talk. Allan tried not to slink past him when he followed the order, but he almost couldn't help a little touch of head down tail between legs. At least if Raina had spanked him he would have enjoyed it. With Aaron it would just hurt. He took his chair and got ready for his punishment. Aaron's eyebrows knit together. I don't get you, man. You have a beautiful, intelligent, well-connected mate who wants you. Wolf or not. Doesn't matter. How about we talk about this envelope I'm dropping off for you, as you requested. He pushed it toward him. His alpha put up his hand to wave the topic change away. Adam told me you had sex with her. This is no longer in the arena of talk about it later. Fuck Adam's nosy bullshit, Allan said. He had no right to tell you. You knew he'd tell me. Aaron's gaze drifted up to the ceiling. Technically, it's his responsibility to tell me when one of my pack is being a certified jackass. Like it's your responsibility to punish a wolf who commits a crime? Where were you when she was almost revealing us to the whole world? Allan smacked the table and the sound cracked the room. Her father is her alpha. He did what he felt was responsible and there are extenuating circumstances. Aaron went for the envelope and clicked the end on the table. Her stunt at Joe's isn't the issue either. Something else is going on here. Allan got to his feet. Well, it's the issue for me. That's bullshit. I don't know what the issue is, but I expect you to deal with it by the time the Du Bois leave tomorrow. I am dealing with it. His brother opened the envelope, a patronizing note in his voice. Ignoring her is not dealing with it. And fucking her is certainly not dealing with it. I didn't. One of Aaron's fingers went up and Allan bit his tongue. The barn was obviously public knowledge, or at least pack knowledge. Aaron shook his head and pulled the documents out of the envelope, looking them over and thankfully moving on from the naked dick direction the conversation had been headed. This is the report from the church that Elise said she'd read. Yes. One of my deputies tracked it down and got a copy. Plus that second page, that's the listings from the church registry and from the parish priest's house that Elise thinks is where she was left. He pointed to the last page. The priest died years ago and apparently the nuns didn't remember her. What did you tell them this was regarding? Aaron's dark eyes turned suspicious. You know I don't like it when people know too much. I told them I was running background on my cousin's new wife. See if she had a criminal past she was hiding. Allan put his hands on his hips. No one knows anything. She was living as a human. You'd know all about that, wouldn't you? His alpha raised one eyebrow. You. No, you can't get rid of your wolf. Something snapped inside and Allan punched the table. Will you all stop saying that? Fuck. I don't want that. My wolf is what makes me who I am. As what makes me the best person to do the job I do. And protecting the humans is what we were made to do. He retreated, feeling like he'd taken one too many steps toward a cliff. Aaron continued to read the papers, and Allan seethed, wishing he could take back everything he'd said. His family didn't understand him and he was fine with it. He just wanted to be free to help the human world. That was why the wolves had been created. They were protectors. He was fulfilling his destiny. His brother put the papers down and met his eyes with a heavy sigh. You know, I support what you're doing in town. But shit, Allan. Adam thinks she really loves you. You have to tread lightly. You cannot have sex with her like she's some stranger you'll never see again. I told you I didn't have sex with her. So she tied you to a tractor and left your pants open and just walked away? Allan's whole face heated. Technically, yes. That's unlikely. Then ask her. Aaron threw the papers onto the table and sighed. We've got to deal with this. Elise thing, and having her in our pack has inextricably bonded the Dubois family with ours, even if she didn't belong to them. They feel like she's their responsibility. Everything we do from here on out is going to affect them in some way. You cannot fuck around with this relationship. The alphaness of Aaron's last comment struck him hard in the chest. His first instinct was to fight. He didn't care about relationships between the werewolf families. He only really cared about being able to serve the people of somewhere. I promise I won't have sex with her. You'd better not. Aaron pointed at him. Don't make me order you. Don't make me go alpha. You know I don't like doing that with you and Adam. You're my brothers. I want what's best for you. Well, Raina is not what's best for me. That's not what fate says. His alpha tapped his finger on the table. And if fate talks, you listen. Allan pushed off and backed away, always facing Aaron, showing as much respect as he could. But he knew better than his brother did, and he sure as hell knew better than fucking fate. Aaron nodded at the door and Allan was out and in his truck before the alpha changed his mind. The last thing he wanted was to have to explain being tied to a tractor. Of course, the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about it said something, too. It said he needed to get laid. Or it might have been that the full moon was so close. He pulled up to his house, making lists in his head about all the things he needed to do. All the showering and dressing that morning had meant he hadn't cleaned the house. Everything was a mess. He never liked to leave his house a mess before he went on a run, just in case one of the guys stopped by and wondered what had happened, then couldn't find him. Being the sheriff now, it was more important than ever that his life looked like everyone else's. The scent of Raina was still all over him. He was surprised Aaron hadn't smelled it, but it was everywhere, like it was in his pores. Maybe he'd have to take another shower. He wiped his nose as he keyed open his house. The first thing he noticed was, it wasn't how he'd left it. His wolf went on the defensive, but the smell of pine sol made it back down. Criminals tended not to clean. The house was freaking spotless. Everything had been picked up and put away. He could hear strange noises coming from his kitchen, and carefully approached from around the corner, trying to keep himself from being seen. With her head in the oven and her ass in the air, Raina was humming to herself. Now he knew why he'd smelled her. She was here. And fuck, she looked like a rodeo queen. She'd put on an 80s puffy jean skirt with high brown cowboy boots and a tight jean shirt. When she turned around, her eyes went wide and she squealed. She closed the oven door with one booted foot and peeled off two big, red oven mitts. Her shirt wasn't her typical corset, but it still hung open just enough for him to get a good eyeful of cleavage. Hi, honey. Her sing-songy voice enticed him to take another step forward. You're home. Chapter 11. Raina. Her cousin, Aria LeBlanc, sniffed as she entered the VonBrandt library. I would say it went well, but then I don't see him behind you. And you're wearing the I want to torture someone with a blunt object face. Her boots clicked on the hardwoods as she crossed the massive library/lounge. I shouldn't have done it, Aria. She sank into the couch next to her cousin, and laid her head on her cousin/sister's shoulder. I thought he cared. I thought he'd finally changed his mind, and then a sob tore from her throat. Will we always be alone, Aria? He was my chance to truly feel whole. And he doesn't want me. We have your dad. We have the pack. We are not alone, Raina. Aria stroked her hair. I know. I miss Mom and Aunt Piper. They would know what to do. I can't ask Dad about this. I know. But we are survivors, Raina. One step at a time. I wish I had a better answer for you. I know you felt like he was the one. He is the one. He's just too fucking stubborn to admit it. If he can't see past his issues, then he doesn't deserve you, sweetie. And that's the truth. You're beautiful and strong and one of the best enforcers the New Orleans pack has ever had, second only to myself, of course. Raina couldn't help the half-giggle, half-sob. Arya was trying to cheer her up, and it was helping a little. I just need to run and forget about Allan VonBrandt. Fate fucked up on this one. Maybe once we get home I can find a project to consume my time and keep my mind off the fact that I met my mate. And lost him too. Tears leaked from her eyes and she shuddered through a sob. I hate to say I still want him, she growled. He's a dick. Tell me he's a dick and I shouldn't care about him. He's an absolute dick, jerkface, coward who's not worthy to lick the dirt from your boots. You gave him every chance to, and more than most women in your position would have done. He blew it. She sucked in a deep breath and growled. He did. I know what might cheer you up even more. Raina sat up, wiped her face with her hands and faced her friend. What? Your dad and the other alphas here decided that this Elise thing is too big to ignore, but no one has been able to find any leads on her origin, so they are calling another summit. What good is that going to do? Raina's breathing evened out. Nothing like a little pack business to give a girl perspective on life. When are we coming back? Great. Like I really need to see Allan again. Maybe Dad will let me sit this one out. We are headed to Vegas, baby. They are calling in all the pack alphas. No. This is huge, Raina. At least we don't have to come back here. The last person I ever want to see again is Raina. Speak of the devil, Arya swore. Allan came storming into the library. You're not naked. Why would I be naked, asshole? And why should you care? Raina jumped from the couch and met him in the center of the library. I woke up and the crack of her palm against his face stopped his speech. Shock spread through his expression, but she didn't care. He'd broken her heart in a way that no other man on the planet was capable of doing. Raina was strong, happy, and loved life before coming to somewhere. Now she just felt dead inside. She'd given up so much to win him over and he'd said fuck you more ways than she could count. Well, she was done. After the moon run, she'd refused to waste another second pining over the life she could have had with him. Fuck you, Allan VonBrandt. Raina fled the room, weaving between people who'd no doubt overheard her outburst. It didn't matter. She was here for one more night. Then she was going home or to Vegas or wherever her father said. Anywhere but somewhere, Texas. Once in the front yard, she unzipped her boots, towed them off and kept running. She undid her corset next and threw it across the yard. The run didn't officially start for another hour, but she had no desire to speak with anyone, especially Allan. She could hear him calling her name from the front stoop. Raina shoved her jeans down her legs and kicked them off too. Kneeling down, she embraced the flow of magic around her and called to it. Her skin tingled as the magic changed her. One moment a woman and then the next a wolf. Thank the God she wasn't naked so he didn't have to kill anyone, but damn, his face hurt. On his heels from the slap, he ignored the angry red-faced she-wolf in the library and ran after Raina. Aaron stopped him with a steady hand. Allan, I thought I told you. He pushed his brother off. No, you don't understand. Come the fuck back here, Aaron called after him, but he ignored his alpha. Just for the briefest of moments. He had to find her. He followed her out the front door. Raina. But she was, what the fuck? Taking off her boots, what the hell was she doing? Something caught him by the heart. No, she was going to shift. Allan took off at a dead run, passing first one high-heeled boot, then the other. She had her corset off and her breasts were unfettered. Fuck no. Feet could just reach her. Raina, he called again, passing the corset laid out on the ground and then her jeans, but there was no Raina. It was the woods and the dark and she was gone. He slid on his knees in the rough dirt and let out a long ragged growl. He pushed to his feet and walked out of the trees, stopping to pick up her black jeans and throw them over his shoulder. He had the corset in his hand and was folding it into some semblance of quarters when he saw the dark-haired Louisiana wolf from the library come through the front doors. Her face was less red, but her jaw was set in a hard line and she stomped toward him. Just what he needed, an earful. Allan bent to retrieve Raina's last boot and stood to take his tongue lashing from her friend with the matching features. Her sister? No, she didn't have a sister, he didn't think. How could he not even know if his mate had a smack? The impact of the slap sent him reeling for a moment before he caught his ground and his vision narrowed. What the hell was that for? He asked. And why is everyone slapping me? You've got one of those slappable faces, I guess. Adam's sarcasm rang out from the stoop. Allan wanted to smack a face or two of his own. You're an asshole, the she-wolf said, a curl to her lip. No one hurts my cousin and gets away with it. From the porch, Aaron called out lazily, his arms crossed and his body languidly resting against a column. You can't kill him. But he does deserve an ass-kicking, said Raina's cousin. Be my guest. Aaron raised his eyebrows and smiled. We've been waiting for this for years now. Feel free to break some bones. Adam's tone of mockery earned a snarl from Allan. Everyone needs to just calm down and stay the fuck out of my business. He used Raina's boots to point at the angry cousin. And you stay away from me. Arya. Francis's voice came from behind Aaron, and the porch parted to let the old New Orleans Alpha through the red sea of onlooking wolves. You leave the poor man alone. Her lengthening neck told Allan, while Arya might not like her orders, but she wasn't about to disobey her alpha. At least he was safe for the time being. And you, son, Francis continued, you'd better be about to bond with my daughter or I will let Arya break some of those bones of yours. Allan sucked in a breath and glanced at Aaron. Apparently, everyone was immensely entertained by the prospect of seeing him get beat up by a girl. He shook his head. I don't get it. I came here to bond with her. I thought we were going to run. But she just smacked me and ran off and shifted. He waved after her. I mean, I thought she was running around naked, but I felt it. The thing you feel. The fate. I get it now. Aaron and Francis exchanged glances, but they didn't look quite as sympathetic as he'd expected. Instead, they both advanced, coming down the steps toward him. You mean you slept with her? Aaron's pointed tone left no question. This was his alpha talking. I did. And she made some good points about my plans, kids and things. She was right, only I didn't see it, not really until... He stopped, biting his lip. It wasn't appropriate to talk about fucking a man's daughter in front of him. But that had been it. The moment he knew he couldn't fight fate. And then everything just made sense. He could tell from how carefully Aaron was watching Francis that at least his brother understood what had changed. After being inside her, after coming in her, after feeling her that deeply, he couldn't ignore it. So you're going to mate my daughter? Francis seemed disproportionately calm as he continued to advance on Allan. Yes, sir. I had planned to bond with her when I found her. But she just slapped you? Francis asked. Yes, sir. Francis was so close, Allan could smell his aftershave. The New Orleans Alpha kept walking, and Allan had to fight not to back himself up all the way to the woods. He had the uncanny sensation that he'd done something wrong, but he wasn't quite sure what it was. He stood his ground and pulled the boots and corset behind his back. Do you think she slapped you for no reason? Francis still showed no emotion, just kept moving closer inch by inch. No, sir. That's right. Francis stopped his forward motion and cast a side glance at Arya. What would you say happened, my dear? Arya's voice was sharp like a knife. She said she thought he really cared. But it turned out he didn't. Allan felt that blow deep. He deserved it. All he had done up until that point was try to get rid of Raina. But if he'd just let her fuck him that first night they met, they could have avoided all this bullshit and just made it. He let out a breath. I care. Did you tell her that? Aaron asked from somewhere behind Francis. I told her she was right. Isn't that the same thing? He shrugged. As though on cue, everyone groaned at once. Adam, Aaron, Francis, Arya, and the peanut gallery of Oklahoma and East Texas wolves who all crowded out the door to watch the drama unfold. Allan narrowed his gaze. What? I told her she was right. Francis's face softened and the old alpha patted his shoulder. You meant? Well, boy. Arya, maybe you should set him straight. The other wolves streamed around him, all making their way toward the woods so they could all have their spot to undress in peace when the shift took them. Some clapped Allan's back, and some just offered him looks of condolence. Only Arya remained. He laid Raina's clothing on the stoop and stood her boots beside the pile of black. Arya clucked at him. You really don't deserve her, you know. Allan ran his tongue around his mouth. He never liked to admit he'd been wrong, but he felt this so deeply, he couldn't stop the words from coming. I know I don't deserve her. Arya studied him with her deep, intense stare, and then rolled her eyes. She loves you still somehow. You lucked out there, buddy. She does. He was the hot, still stinging skin of his cheek. It doesn't feel like she loves me. Well, I know Reyna and she loves you. Pisses her off that she does, but she does. Arya's brows knitted together. I guess you can't help but love your mate. 2 days ago he would have argued with that statement, but not this day. This day he could do nothing but agree. They both looked out into the looming woods and Allan sighed. I guess there's nothing I can do until tomorrow morning. I just don't like the thought of her out there alone without me. Arya lifted a brow, and Allan chuckled when he heard the irony in his own words. He'd had his chance. He only hoped she was into 7 chances. Well, she'll be back here in the morning anyway, whether you find her or not, which you shouldn't even try because you probably won't. She likes to sulk when she's angry. She wouldn't leave without letting me try again, would she? He chewed the side of his cheek. He was supposed to work on Monday, which meant he wouldn't just be able to follow her to New Orleans without a major bump in his schedule and some kind of explanation to the guys at the station. Her cousin shrugged. She's pretty stubborn. Allan worked his jaw and pursed his lips. That makes 2 of us. Chapter 1. Las Vegas, Nevada. The low light in the dining room of Amare usually suited Marco DeSantis' tastes, all the better to prowl in the semi-dark. Plus, shadows gave him panty-dropping cheekbones and made his eyes pop. Squinting through candlelight was tantamount to beer goggles in Marco's experience. But tonight something felt different. Itchy, like he'd forgotten he was wearing wool, or staticky, like he kept touching a light socket in the dry air. He couldn't put his finger on it, and the half-dark made everyone seem sinister. Or romantic if you were into that. The farther he strolled into the dining room, the more electric his insides became. Someone was out there, and judging from the only other time he'd felt this way, he assumed it was another shifter. His first instinct was to ignore the sensation, but even as wrapped up as he had been in preparing a special plate of crudo for one of the A-listers who frequented Amare, he could not block out the pull. He had done his best to tightly shave segments of fish and arrange them on the platter, but he had to turn the task over and wander out among the humans. Partly out of curiosity, partly out of annoyance, Marco stalked between the heavy naked oak tables and high-backed, tufted leather chairs. His employer liked him to schmooze with the ineffably wealthy clientele, but he had no patience for the old millionaires trying to impress their gold-digging dates, or the D-list celebrities maxing out credit cards in a desperate attempt to look relevant. He felt like he was on a mission. One of the waiters streamed past him, angling plates of elegantly arranged pasta nests onto one of the long tables. Marco made unfortunate eye contact with Troy, his floor manager, who pointed at the table as though it were Marco's responsibility. Chef DeSantis, said a pock-faced actor when Marco finally stopped. A revelation as usual. The man pointed to his plate and Marco offered a bow. He put on the affected Italian accent everyone expected. Grazie, grazie, he offered. Thank you so much, Joe. You know I make the best only for you. The actor and his wife gushed over the food and Marco continued to bow and smile. Tourists. They lived for the show. You know, I've been to Italy many times and you are the real deal. Marco. The older man stood and shook his hand, but Marco already had his eyes on the next table, looking for the source of the itch. Yes, you must have Italy in your veins, my boy, the blonde-wigged companion smiled up through impeccable teeth. Because your food is unbelievable. Marco gave her a wiggle of the brows that sent a blush up underneath all her makeup. He was just about to kiss the woman's hand when he spotted her. The source of the itch. Sitting in the very back, face hidden by a menu, her long dark hair spilled over her shoulder and contrasted sharply with the white leather of the chair. So, the shifter was a woman? He hadn't met one of those before, unless you counted his long estranged mother, which he didn't. This should be interesting. Marco pressed his lips quickly to the older woman's hand, and begged away. Each table glanced up at him expectantly, as though he might stop and pay his attentions to them next, but he had found his mission. One of the waiters stopped at the shifter's table, and the menu came down. Her Eyes settled on him over the top of the chair in front of her and wrecked. His insides setting everything on fire. He'd felt lust before, hell he made people lust after him for a living, but he'd never felt this before. Marco's jaw fell open just a touch and he let her see his tongue working inside his mouth, letting her imagine all the things he might do to her with that tongue. Her eyes seemed to twinkle, almost in amusement, and Marco felt the challenge rise inside him. He put on his best sexy Playboy chef eye stare and kept stalking through people toward her. When he got a little closer, he could hear her back and forth with the waiter, although her eyes didn't leave Marco's. And don't give me any of this bullshit cucumber water with extra oxygen or whatever the fuck y'all pump into this place to make me spend money. Just open the tap into a glass like a human being and bring me some fucking water. She handed the menu to the stunned waiter. No fucking sparkles, okay? The waiter stuttered and took the menu. Why, yes ma'am. And I want the tasting menu. The secret one. With all the wine pairings. Of course, yes. Certainly. The waiter saw Marco approach and his eyes went wide, begging to be saved. Marco approached the table with languid ease, sliding his arms onto the back of the chair opposite her like he might be caressing a lover. Ciao, signorina. And what brings you to me Amari this evening? Her eyes flickered between him and the silent waiter, still holding the paper menu like a shield. She shook her head. If this is the chef that I've heard so much about, he can drop the fake Italian bullshit. I can smell an actor from the Million Mile Mall. Just make my food and leave me the fuck alone. She narrowed her gaze. This isn't the Olive Garden. I don't need you to make salad on me or any shit like that. With a dismissive wave of her hand, she turned to her phone, swiping angrily at some letters on the screen. Marco nodded at the waiter and switched to his flat Nevada accent. Please put in the lady's order. Without looking up, she called out. And remember what I said about the sparkles. Marco studied her as she texted. She was drop-dead hot, easily the most beautiful woman in the room, which probably meant she knew she was hot. No one had that kind of skin and cheekbones and lips and tits and didn't know she was a goddess. But all her energy read unavailable. Like blaring lights and sirens, fucking available. Normally Marco rose to a challenge, but something was different about this woman. Well, for starters, he was pretty sure she wasn't a woman. No one made his wolf growl inside like another shifter, and the one male shifter he'd met in his life hadn't come anywhere near this woman. She was the Disneyland firecracker show of shifters to the beast inside him. Plus, it wasn't her wolf that was on the offensive. There was something distinctly normal about her anger, if he could just find out what it was. Marco pulled the chair out and sat down across from her. Her icy eyes slid up his body and landed on his face. He saw the nostril flare, the pupil dilation. She felt something too. Instead of more bullshit, he opted for the head-on approach. She appeared to be the kind who wouldn't fall for a game. Those were his favorite. What made you pick Amare? He asked, nodding at the ceiling as though it represented the entire empire he'd built. She regarded him with fire in her eyes, pursed her lips and shook her head. Nope. That's not working either. But she couldn't fool Marco. He recognized this facade all too well. It was the same one he put up when someone had reached too deep and plucked too hard on something inside. It was the wounded animal defense. He softened. Come on, you have to know you're the most beautiful woman in this place, maybe in this building, I don't know, I haven't seen all of them. You're not going to fault a guy for trying. A smirk curled her lips into half a smile. I'm not sure if that's a compliment. Marco leaned forward and pitched his voice down to gravelly. It was. There was the full smile. She put her phone down. You really want to know why I came here? Because you won't like the answer. Marco settled his arms onto the table. Try me. You'd be surprised what kind of punishment I can handle from a woman as beautiful as you. No blush, no response, nothing. Wow. Even the brash ones usually folded with that kind of intentional innuendo. This woman. He needed to know this woman. Okay then. She crossed her arms. I make it my business to try all the so-called best in whatever city I visit. My job, we don't get to travel much. Pause and the briefest glance of a wince across her features. Pain. Her job. Or family or something, and it was visceral enough that she felt it in her body. Damn, he wanted to strip her down and nuzzle her straight into orgasm, right? There in front of Joe and everyone. No woman that beautiful should be hurt like that. So whenever I travel, I make a point to try all the best chefs, she finished, with a flick of her head. How many of these best chefs have you tried? Marco asked. She eyed the waiter as he set down her tall, slim glass of plain old water. Enough. And how many times have you been pleased? A downturn of her eyes, a curl of her mouth. Not enough. Marco's wolf practically rose up and jumped across the table. He wanted to get her up to his suite and eat her. But first he was going to make her eat those words. This guy was trying so hard, but she'd heard every line in the book. He was hot. In an arrogant I'm awesome and I know it kind of way. The Italian shtick was lame, but this was Vegas. Everyone played a part. If she hadn't been so pissed about not being let into the summit meeting with her alpha, she might have played along with his Romeo bullshit attempt at flirting with her. As it stood, Rain, the almost brother she hadn't seen in years, was in the summit as her alpha's enforcer, and she was out here. The least she could do is enjoy some good food. Maybe riling up this fancy pants chef would get her some really good cooking. It had been a long time since she'd had something fresh. That really knocked her socks off. Still, the chef was a wolf. That was new and intriguing. She'd been under the impression that the Vegas pack pretty much stayed off the grid. In fact, they hadn't even come to the summit at all. Why don't you come up to the VIP table and let me show you why Amare is the best restaurant you'll ever eat at? His voice was like honey and she was hungry for something sweet. Arya raised an eyebrow. That was one hell of a proposal too. She dropped a couple grand just to get this table. Getting to sit at the VIP table would be a true treat. Even if the food wasn't as good as he claimed, she wasn't about to pass up the invitation. She loved the energy and the passion of a good restaurant kitchen. Although her mind was wandering in a dirtier direction as his scent filled her lungs. Chefs were good in bed. She would know, having slept with several. They wanted everything to be perfect and they worked hard to make sure guests were satisfied. Plus, they didn't cling or call after she left. It was a win-win. Fabulous sex. No strings attached. Damn, she could use a good lay tonight. Watching Raina and Allan in the coat closet earlier this week had really gotten her juices flowing. And as of yet, she hadn't found an outlet for her building libido. But with Chef Makati, as Raina would promptly nickname him, right in front of her, she might be able to scratch that particular itch.